Sri Lanka is in crisis. People are lining up for gas, milk supplies, food. The country is without power for over 14 hours a day. The anger and the frustration spilled out into the streets outside the president's house in Colombo. There was violence. Emergency has been declared. And despite this, the Sri Lankan government is still without a plan, without a roadmap. It has been unable to reassure its people that it is aware of what is going wrong, that it empathizes, cares about them, and is coming up with a solution. The silence has made it worse, created anger and panic, with Sri Lankans looking at an uncertain and unhappy future. Welcome everyone to another edition of Off Limits. Our guest this time is a scholar and a well-known writer, columnist, peace activist from Sri Lanka, the executive director at the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka, Jehan Perera. We're so happy to have you with us, Jehan, and especially now, given the current crisis in your country. We really need you to give us some of a background. Did you know that this was going to come on in the manner it has? Or has it caught you by surprise like it seems to have many of us?
Thank you, Seema, for showing this interest in Sri Lanka. We are very grateful that India has been supporting Sri Lanka in this very difficult period of our current existence. Yes, this problem has been a growing one. It has been growing over the last for last year at least, we have been facing crises, especially in the aftermath of COVID. And now more recently, the severe shortages of food, the long lines that are forming everywhere in the country, where people have to sometimes stand in line for milk food for their children. And in addition, there are lines that are like a kilometer long of vehicles trying to get petrol and diesel. Then there are these 13-hour power cuts. In fact, at this time, we are in a power cut right now. And we have been now, it's for the last 4 hours. We don't know for how much longer it's going to be there. So the economic crisis is unprecedented. We have never faced this, not even in the time of the war, which ended in 2009, did we face this type of crisis. As for the protests that took place 2 days ago, yes, that caught us by surprise. The magnitude of the protest caught us by surprise, though in a way it reflects the frustration and anger of people who just can't understand why we are in this, why the government is not doing anything, and why the government is not giving us a roadmap as to what is going to happen in the next few months.
Before I come to the protest itself and the character and the nature of the protest, this whole thing, it's almost like a country gone bankrupt suddenly, right? You don't have food, you don't have petrol, you don't have diesel, you don't have money. How could this happen now? Where was the government and where is the government?
What we are really facing is a shortage of foreign currency, foreign exchange, dollars. And the reason that we have come to this very sorry pass is that our income from tourism, income from remittances, which used to sustain the economy, has come down considerably, while we have been consuming at the same levels. And also there are these huge loans that have fallen due that we took in the past. We took these huge loans in the past, which are now proving to be unsustainable. We did not use those loans for productive purposes, in the way they could have been and should have been used. Instead, we use those loans for consumption, to give handouts maybe, to permit people to live a better life than they ought to be living. And secondly, we use those loans for enormous infrastructure schemes, projects, to build new cities, to build airports, ports that have no economic return. So we have the loans to repay, but we did not generate the productive capacity within our country to earn enough to repay those loans. That's what has happened now. And right now, I mean, what's happening is that the government is collecting money, every dollar we earn is being set aside to repay some foreign loan. And people are getting very angry about it because, of course, Sri Lanka says we have taken sovereign government loans and we should repay it, otherwise our credit rating will fall some more. But other people are saying, no, you should renegotiate, you should negotiate. In any event, our credibility as a country to which people will want to give loans, or to if we issue debt, they will purchase the debt. It is very low in any event. So rather than now use our remaining dollars to pay foreign bondholders, we should use that to purchase diesel, petrol, medicine, food. And that's become a big issue in the country at the present time.
So it is, it's so tragic because Sri Lanka had come out of the conflict, internal conflict, was rebuilding to some extent. I mean, of course, the fault lines remained and the schisms remained, but even so, and it was repairing and healing itself. And now suddenly this. So obviously, this is over successive governments. Or do you, or in Sri Lanka, actually blame the Rajapaksa government more than, say, the previous for this, for this crisis?
Well, we have to blame the present government because they are the ones in power for the last 2 years, and they are the ones currently in charge. They are the ones who should have taken remedial action. Of course, it comes from the past also. It's a build-up. As I said, we have been living beyond our means. We have invested in totally unproductive infrastructure. Of course, that was done by the Rajapaksas in the previous period. They are the ones who really spent a lot of money on infrastructure, which is totally unproductive at this time. But at the current time, I mean, what they did was when they came to power, they did some very irrational things. For instance, the first thing that the government did when they won the election, they won the presidential election, but perhaps with an eye on the general election that was going to come in 9 months thereafter that, they cut taxes. They cut all taxes by like 25%, increased the tax threshold from, say, 150,000 rupees to 250,000 rupees. So a lot of people fell out of the tax net. And their theory was that if you reduce the taxes on individuals and on corporations, that there'll be more investment, more production. But then, unfortunately, it coincided with COVID coming. So all those plans went away of increased investment because we shut down for the COVID. But we also didn't now get the tax revenue that we were getting. So there was a double blow to government finances that came right at the beginning. Then thereafter, the most irrational policy that any country could do, they decided to ban chemical fertilizer and that make an immediate transition to organic fertilizer. That was a disaster. I mean, all our top scientists, our professors all said, this will not happen, this won't work. There is no other country in the world that is entirely on organic fertilizer. At the most, even very advanced countries such as Germany, 10 to 20% of the land is used. It's a niche product, organic agriculture, but the bulk of it is you use chemical fertilizer. But they persisted for about 6 months until crops began to fall. And even now, our agriculture has been reduced, has been crippled because of this. We are still trying to recover, and now difficult to buy the fertilizer because there is no foreign currency to buy the fertilizer. So these are very irrational policies that the government took and for which it has to be held responsible. And now most recently, the present issue is whether or not we should go to the IMF. And most of the thinking, almost all thinking people and economic experts say we have to go to the IMF rather than go to different countries, governments with a begging bowl. We have come to India. India has been very generous, given us $1 billion, then another $500 million this year.
Yeah, money never comes free, it comes with.
Exactly, we know that also, and we are signing various defense agreements now with India. But then in addition, we are going to Bangladesh. First, we get $250 million, then we don't repay that. Now we are going to Bangladesh for another $250 million. But these loans we are getting are very short term because we consume them, we spend them, and we have to find a way to restructure our entire economy and our loans and our international loans, our debt obligations. So people say, go to the IMF. But the government is dragging its feet about going to the IMF. And we think the reason is that they want to pay off another giant loan, $1 billion loan that sovereign bond that is outstanding. And we think that perhaps the reason that they're so determined to pay this $1 billion sovereign bond is that maybe people connected to them have purchased it at a discount and now want to make a lot of money because they have bought it at a discount because foreign bondholders sold it at a discount to others. And now those who hold them will make a lot of money if we pay the full amount of that bond. Because we just can't understand why they don't renegotiate these things and why they don't go to the IMF. And IMF also means transparency. IMF will not give loans like China gives loans, where the government does not have to answer as to what it does with those loans. IMF will ask every step of the way, what are you doing with this money? Is it being used for a productive purpose? Be transparent. I think our people don't want to do that. So therefore, I would hold this government very much responsible, while of course acknowledging that this is a process that started a long time ago. In fact, even 3 years ago, when there was another government in power, the central bank governor at that time, he predicted this. He said, Sri Lanka has now been designated as an upper middle income country because we had passed the 4,200 threshold for becoming an upper middle income country, of course, at the lowest level of upper middle income. And he said, because of that, concessionary aid flows, loans and all we are not going to get it. And we are going to face this foreign currency problem because we have to repay loans that are coming up. But don't worry, we can do it. We have to go to the IMF. It won't be too painful, but we need to go to the IMF. He said it 3 years ago, but this government didn't go to the IMF. So they are responsible. They have to be held accountable.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And let's go now to the protests, because this is, like you said, unprecedented. It's got, you also were surprised, let alone the world. Tell me a little bit about the nature of the protesters. Were they from, is it everyone across the class spectrum, community spectrum? Is it all over, widespread? Tell us a little more, because we don't have enough information.
Yes. Well, I mean, these protests, underlying all these protests is the terrible frustration and anger people are feeling. All people are feeling. Because when you don't have current power for 13 hours, anyone will get angry. In a hot tropical country like ours, to stay without power it's so painful, difficult to sleep, mosquitoes in the night. It's it makes anyone aggravated and they lose their temper. And then, of course, standing in line to buy cooking gas. People have died standing in these lines. I mean, elderly people standing in lines, grandparents standing in lines so that they can take a cooking gas home for their grandchildren because their parents are at work. They have died. So there's a lot of anger in the society that this is happening, and so unexpected because as I said, we were becoming like an upper middle income country. I mean, middle income country. So this is totally unexpected. Now, the initial protests were, the public manifestations were by middle class people coming out in silent protest, educated middle class people coming out, candlelight protests, small groups, but in different parts of the country. This one that took place outside the president's house started as a silent protest by people, a quiet one, but then people decided, something happened where more and more people started coming there. And then this was all being circulated by WhatsApp and social media. And then we had this large crowd. This large crowd actually are of youth, young people, young urban people and many of educated people. It's not as if it was not politically led, because our political parties have said, our mainstream opposition parties have actually advised against having these protests, because they say any protest must have some responsibility. There must be responsible people leading a protest, or they can go out of control. So they actually have not been trying to instigate people to go for these protests, but these are like almost spontaneous, without real leaders. Young people sending WhatsApp messages and saying, come for this. And that's what happened. And then we believe what happened is, when the protests were getting larger and larger, quite near the president's house, it seemed as if, because now the police are standing in the barricades, it seemed inevitable that there would be something, because the crowd is getting larger and larger. They are shouting slogans and pressing against the barricade. Then what happened is that someone set fire to a police bus. Now what the evidence that is emerging is that that person who set fire to the police bus was an individual with police standing around. So it is possibly an instigator wanting to create a problem. And once the bus, of course, went on fire, then people start getting more and more agitated, more and more violent, and then there was a clash. But again, the police behaved with a lot of restraint, the regular police. But then a special unit of the police was brought in. It was called the Special Task Force. And they are the elite police sent to deal with the rioters. And even during the time of the war with the LTT, they were sent to the battlefield. They came in, and their method of dealing with crowds is much more violent. They didn't fire on people. They fired rubber bullets and tear gas. But after they entered, it became more violent. And then it, of course, dispersed, because the firing of rubber bullets and tear gas made people go. And a number of people were arrested. About 100 people were arrested. But what was remarkable was that it is said in the papers, over 300 lawyers went to defend these people in the police station, and get them out.
So, is it true that President Rajapaksa is bringing in the Criminal Act or Terror Attacks Act and laws against the people who are arrested, and is dealing with the crisis through sort of an aggressive assertion of the law? Because the Human Rights Commission has warned against it. We read that. Then we've also, Vikram Singhe has also been speaking about this. So what is the fear?
Yeah, now, initially there was some concern that they would arrest these people under what's called the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Now, the Prevention of Terror, it's quite a harsh law, because it enables people to be kept without being let out on bail. Even the court cannot intervene and release them on bail.
Believe me, Jehan, we have all the same laws. We have the same kind of elite security groups. And so many of our people are in jail because of this, so
there was a fear, but then again, very, very creditably, the Human Rights Commission, which is a state body, appointed by our president, they came out and said, don't use the Prevention of Terrorism Act. This is not an occasion to use that. And actually, there is also another reason why our government should not use it, because the international community has honed in on this. Because we are the recipients from the European Union of something called the GSP Plus tax concession. It enables our goods, our exports, to enter European markets without paying tax, duty-free exports into the European market. But that is on condition that the European Union gives it as a gift, as an incentive, on condition that the country follows human rights standards, international human rights standards, honors 27 international human rights covenants. They have now singled out this Prevention of Terrorism Act, and they have told our government, unless you abolish it or you reform it to conform to international norms, we are going to withdraw this GSP Plus concession. It was withdrawn once at great cost. About 15 years ago, but they withdrew during the time of the war. And we suffered a lot. Sri Lanka's economy suffered a lot. Now we cannot afford to lose the GSP plus. So the government has been trying to amend the law. It has actually amended it a little bit. And if they use it against, them people protesting, their hunger, the long lines, the scarcity, the price rises, then I'm sure the EU will act more punitively towards Sri Lanka. So we should not use it. What the government now has done is they have not used the PTA still, but they have now declared emergency law. Yes. And under emergency law, it becomes a crime. It becomes illegal for us more than 4 or 5 people to gather together in public. So now that law is in effect. Now it becomes a little tricky, because if people do go out to protest, then the government can arrest them under the emergency law. So that's what now we are, it was declared just today, the emergency. Yes. So now we don't, actually we are used to emergency law, because it is said that in our 70 years of independence, we have more years have been under emergency law than under normal law, especially during the wartime, during the time of the war with the LTT, it was always emergency law. In the last few years, we have been under ordinary law. So, I mean, it's not something we are unused to, emergency law, but now it gives the government special power to crack down on protests and arrest protesters. So now we need to see who will be willing to take that risk, and whether but these are young people who are coming out, and maybe they will not stop. Now, for instance, they have planned tomorrow, there's a huge campaign, a WhatsApp campaign, to have protests all over the country. And we don't know whether that will actually materialize, and how the emergency law will impact on it.
Right. So, I mean, just to sort of now start concluding, you've already made it very clear that in dealing with this whole crisis, the government is preferring going with a begging bowl to nations, not going to the IMF, which has got a cleaner kind of funding at the moment. It is brought an emergency to deal with the local protests. It is not spending on what the people's concerns are. So what is really coming out? Are they just sort of in denial, or is the government not really wanting to act? Because you obviously can't, this protest has very clearly shown there's a very, very deep anger, and this anger is not going to be stemmed easily.
It is an anger, because, I mean, the president was a man who was much admired. And the prime minister, his elder brother, also much admired for the role they played in, also are better off now because the war has ended, and the war was the worst thing that could happen to our country. But so to Singster are heroic figures who are much appreciated, and actually that's why he won with this huge majority the last presidential election in November 2019. But now he's not a good manager. He just doesn't know what's happening. And his credibility has come down a lot. And the government's credibility has come down. Now what people are talking about, what we are thinking, is that there should be actually a caretaker government. That's the demand. That's the new demand that's emerging, even from within the government itself, because within the government itself, there are small political parties that are rebelling and criticizing the larger political party within the government. And now they're saying, let there be a caretaker government. I think that's the way forward. But we don't know whether the government will go in that direction, because at the moment it seems to be, it has not announced anything yet. That's what making people very agitated, that it is not saying what it wants to do. They're just not even, and they're not even really empathizing with the suffering of people. They are in a way glossing over it. They are trying to behave as if life is normal. It's not. To organize their parties and the festivals, they have tried to do it. And those festivals and parties that they have tried to organize have been broken up by people just spontaneously going and hooting and jeering and almost like attacking. So, but we are waiting. We are waiting for a firm statement on the part of the government as to what its plan is.
Okay. So let's see, I think, end with this sort of cautionary and not very optimistic note, because your government has had several days now for it to have come with some concrete roadmap, plan of action. And it is always very worrying for the people when that doesn't happen, right? But
Yes.
let's hope, and thank you so much for giving us this time, Jehan. And we'll be
Okay.
back
Thank you.
very soon, I think, to continue
Yeah.
this discussion. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, Seema. Okay. Bye. Bye.
That was Jehan Perera giving us an insight into what is happening in Sri Lanka. The situation is extremely grim, more so as the government does not have a roadmap or a plan to address the concerns of the people, concerns that have brought the people out onto the roads in large numbers, that has resulted in violence, and that has made President Rajapakse declare emergency. There is no food. People are lining up for their basic needs. There is no gas. There are huge power cuts, and the country is in crisis. Whether the government will be able to continue with this, or whether it will fall and be replaced by a caretaker government, which is really the demand right now, waits to be seen. So let's wait and watch and see what happens in our neighboring country. Thank you.